Good morning. I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche organization with your update for January 18th, 2021. Now, today is the official day of the commemoration of the birth of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and a time to reflect on the impact that he had in shaping the last half of the 20th century. There's clearly a crisis in America today as we're moving toward what Helga Zepp-LaRouche calls a new fascism, and I'll be discussing that. But I want to call your attention to an event that's being sponsored today by the Schiller Institute, titled A More Perfect Union Through the Coincidence of Opposites, Martin Luther King and the American Presidency. And this will be at 1 p.m. It will be on the Schiller Institute website, and the discussion will take up the difference between the approach that Martin Luther King had to overcome injustice to that which is now the dominant approach of the Democratic Party, the mainstream media, and others today who really don't care about justice or anything. They're using it for their political purposes, for their political ends. But what we'll talk about is how today everything is reduced to race or gender as the basis of so-called equality, as opposed to King's commitment to extend the idea of economic justice as the basis for achieving real justice, and not just for the United States, but for the world. This is a crucial distinction, and it's important that people reflect on this as we go into the chaotic days ahead, where we're going to see the transition to a new government committed to imposing a new fascism. Now, what we're looking at is how the imperial forces, which include the corporate cartels, the bankers, the media, the Silicon Valley intelligence agencies, and elected officials in both parties, are moving toward emergency measures. And they use the events of January 6th as a pretext for this. And again, I'll just point out the latest comment from Stephen Sund, who was the Capitol Police Chief, who warned that this was coming, that they knew that in advance that there were plans for a violent disruption. He said this was no less than a coordinated violent attack on the Capitol. Coordinated, premeditated. If that's the case, how can you impeach President Trump for inciting something that was already planned and prepared? So the impeachment itself is a fraud, but it's a pretext for something else. And this is what Helga Zepp-LaRouche has said. We're looking at emergency measures of a sort of implementing or imposing a new fascism. In that sense, that's why we're calling it a Reichstag Fire event. It was known beforehand the security was inadequate. Intentionally? Well, it sure looks like that. If you knew in advance that people were preparing for a violent attack, why wouldn't you have more forces there to protect the Capitol from that? Now, additionally, it became the basis for a Trump impeachment, a second impeachment, without a trial, without a total rush to judgment on a charge of incitement to insurrection. What we're looking at is the possibility of provocations, provocateurs who were deployed to start this, and a stand down of security. But what's the intention? It's designed to increase the polarization in the country, not to achieve harmony or justice, but to increase the propensity toward violence. Then you add to that the censorship of President Trump. But it's going to be much broader than just President Trump. Dorsey, the head of Twitter, said, well, we're attacking one account now, but we're going to go way beyond this after the inauguration. So this is not just to keep calm in the transition period ahead, but to prepare to silence any opposition to what the establishment is preparing. And what we can expect probably is a new Patriot Act, whether it's actually a legislative measure or just something that's done with increased presence of military and police in the United States. This is based on the effort originally of Joe Biden in 1995 to criminalize thought crimes, Biden proposed an omnibus crime bill in '95. It was rejected. But after the previous Reichstag fire on September 11th, John Ashcroft and others pushed it through with help from Joe Biden. Ashcroft actually said to Biden, we're using your outline from the 1995 bill for the Patriot Act. And Biden said, go ahead, increase the extension or the reach of the FISA court to conduct surveillance. Ultimately, the idea that terrorism comes from thought, and the criminal thought, in some cases, is planted by the FBI as a pretext. The FBI works out plans, they provide logistics, and then they go in and arrest someone, and sometimes they let people carry out the attacks as false flag attacks to justify more surveillance and more preemptive measures. That's what we're looking at. And what's the purpose of this? To make sure that any opposition to the policies that are being pushed by a Biden administration, the Green New Deal, and especially the Great Reset, a global bankers dictatorship, that any opposition will be associated with Trump and will therefore be criminalized. That if you oppose the policies of the establishment, you must be engaged in criminal terrorist activities. So you combine the censorship with the monopolistic practices of Silicon Valley, with a Biden administration committed to new wars, as Biden has always been in support of these wars, beginning with the Iraq War, and austerity. Biden has always been allied with the bankers, with the credit card companies. This means an end to the U.S. Constitution as we know it if it's not stopped. Now, what's the alternative? Going out in the street with guns, charging up the steps of the Capitol, or organizing the growing numbers of people who are angry, typified by 75 million plus votes for Donald Trump in the last election. Organize them around a program to hit the vulnerability of this deep state or military industrial complex crew. And what's that alternative? Lyndon LaRouche's 4 laws. If you want to beat the deep state, you have to hit them where they're weakest. And right now, they're sitting on top of an unprecedented debt bubble. The purpose of the Great Reset is to allow them to pay down the debt with money stolen from you by hyperinflating the currency, moving to some form of global digitalized currency. But essentially, money for free from the central banks to the speculators while choking the real economy, meaning no investment in small and medium businesses, no investment in new technologies, no investment in increasing industrial and manufacturing policies in the United States, and a lowered standard of living in the name of what? The Green New Deal. That we're producing too much and consuming too much, and the solution, therefore, is to starve people, to cut back in healthcare, cut back in infrastructure, cut back in education funding. So this is what we're looking at, and knowing that the opposition will increase, they're using the polarization and provocations to give them the pretext for a crackdown. Now, what are the LaRouche 4 laws? Well, you start with Glass-Steagall, which would guarantee there will be no more bailouts for the investment bankers. Bankers will have to choose. Are you going to be a commercial bank, in which case you'll be protected, but you'll have requirements. You'll have to lend to the productive sector. If you want to be a speculator, if you want to be an investment bank, you can do it, but you will not be bailed out. And if you engage in fraud, you'll go straight to jail. This is what Glass-Steagall, which was drafted in the first 100 days under Franklin Roosevelt, did, which protected our banking system until it was repealed in 1999 with the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act signed by Bill Clinton. Once you get that done, then you have a Hamiltonian credit policy. No more Federal Reserve funny money, but credit that goes to the banking system, to these commercial banks that are protected, to be made into loans for communities to develop, for investment in industry and agriculture, And then the third law is infrastructure, investment in infrastructure. This includes water management, includes power, it includes transportation. It includes everything that we need to have a modern full-set economy. And then the fourth law of LaRouche is at least 5% of expenditures have to go into research and development, especially in the frontier technologies that will guarantee higher rates of return of real value added to the economy through improvements in energy density, scientific investigation, the space program, things of that sort. So LaRouche's four laws, it hits the enemy where it's most vulnerable. Their ability to use central banks to bail themselves out while they steal from you. If we get the Glass-Steagall and we get these other three laws, we'll be headed toward reviving the American system. So what's needed? Leadership. For the growing numbers of angry people, unemployed, demoralized people, give them a mission to revive the American system. That's what our proposal is. That's what the LaRouche Organization and the Schiller Institute are fighting for. Join us in this effort, and join us today at 1 p.m. Eastern for the Schiller Institute event commemorating the important advances associated with the life and work of Dr. Martin Luther King. So thank you for joining me today, and I will see you again tomorrow.